Hello, I'm Francesca Paletta, a neurologist and postdoctoral researcher at the Headache Centre at King's College London. I'm going to talk to you about a very interesting condition that has emerged in the field of neurology and in particular in the headache subspecialty in the most recent years, which is visual snow syndrome. And I'm hoping to bring you a brief overview of what we currently understand about this condition, including its common clinical presentation, as well as the most recent research advances that are allowing to uncover part of its mysterious pathophysiology. The diagnosis of visual snow is based on a set of clinical criteria that are now currently included in the appendix of ICHG-3. The main criterion is based on the presence of tiny flickering dots that resemble the noise of a detuned analog television and which occupy the entire visual field. The dots, which are called snow or static, are usually of black-gray color on a white background or of gray-white color on a darker background. But it's also quite common for patients to report transparent, flashing, or even colored dots. And aside from the main basic symptoms of the static, patients often complain of additional visual symptoms, which are in fact part of the criteria for the full visual snow syndrome. And these are palinopsia, which can take the form of trailing or after images, enhanced syntoptic phenomena, which arise from the eye and can sometimes be experienced by healthy individuals as well, photophobia or sensitivity to light, and difficulty seeing at night or nyctalopia. It is really crucial to consider the main mimics of visual snow in its differential diagnosis, and this, especially for us headache specialists, mostly takes the form of prolonged visual aura. The main difference with aura is that visual snow is persistent, with no clear remission periods, and also that it occupies the entire visual field. And finally, it can also be experienced by individuals who are not migraineurs. And other conditions to be excluded in the differential diagnosis are severe eye disorders, like bilateral retinopathies, for example, as well as recent intake of hallucinogenics, which can cause a condition known as hallucinogen persisting perceptual disorder that can have a very similar clinical presentation to visual snow. Even if the definition of the condition is very recent, we've come to know a lot more about the clinical characteristics of visual snow in recent years, thanks to a growing body of literature on the topic. We have in fact discovered that visual snow mostly presents in a clinical spectrum, with some people having very mild symptoms that perhaps they don't even recognize as problematic, and others on the opposite end with very intrusive and disturbing symptoms that have an impact on everyday life. And usually, when at its most severe, visual snow manifests together with migraine as well as tinnitus in up to 3/4 of patients. Unfortunately, most treatment options that we normally use, including migraine preventives, are mostly useless in visual snow, highlighting how, even if there is a strong comorbidity between the two conditions, these are nonetheless separate disease entities. We've also understood from epidemiological studies in the general population that visual snow is not that uncommon, with almost 4% of the population reporting it in the UK. And finally, visual snow has shown to manifest with a similar phenotype in different regions of the world. Although the pathophysiology of visual snow is largely unknown, recent neuroimaging studies have allowed to uncover important aspects of the condition. The first study performed in visual snow syndrome was an FDG PET study, initially involving 17 patients, recently increased to 20, which showed a hypermetabolism of the right lingual gyrus in patients with visual snow. And the lingual gyrus is part of the associative visual cortex, and interestingly, it had previously been involved in migrainous photophobia as well. A study which came from our group at King's confirmed the involvement of the lingual gyrus in visual snow syndrome, showing an altered lactate level in this region, which points directly to altered anaerobic metabolism. And this also corresponded to altered function shown with fMRI in the same patients. Aside from functional changes, structural abnormalities have also been found in the brain of people suffering with visual snow. Voxel-based morphometry has twice shown increased gray matter volume in several areas of the visual system, including V1 and visual motion area V5, as well as the cerebellum and several other brain regions. Finally, in a small cohort of patients who underwent IMP SPECT, a recent paper found significant hyperperfusion in an area spanning the occipital temporal lobes and roughly corresponding to the ventral visual stream. Neurophysiology has also been very useful in helping us understand further aspects of the condition and also possibly to explain part of its strong association with migraine. Through the use of visual evoked potential mainly, two different groups have shown a reduction in the physiological process of habituation in patients with visual snow in response to repetitive visual stimuli. Lack of habituation here was also associated with different signs of increased cortical excitability at the level of the visual system. And this is important because we know that habituation alterations are part of migraine pathophysiology as well. A slightly contrasting result was found by Aaron and colleagues, who showed that patients with visual snow syndrome have an increased latency in a specific component of the visual evoked potentials, which is the N145, that symbolizes a dysfunctional processing at the level of the associative visual cortex. In the study, however, no changes in habituation were found, highlighting how more efforts are needed to be able to reproduce the previous findings. So in conclusion, visual snow syndrome is a chronic and unremitting condition which can sometimes be very disabling, particularly when it's associated with ongoing migraine. Most treatment options are useless for visual snow. However, a correct diagnosis and recognition of the problem can be very relevant for patients. So, in conclusion, more research is needed to understand the underlying basic biology of the condition, which most likely involves abnormal processing in the visual system that most likely is downstream of the primary visual cortex, and that possibly also involves different sensory brain regions outside of the visual system itself. Thank you very much for your attention.